Democratic Senator Adam Schiff accused Trump of using the tariffs to support dictators. Here's what he said.
So in case you missed it, Trump a couple of weeks ago imposed 50% tariffs on Brazil. What is this all about? Well, first of all, we have a positive trade balance with Brazil. So why on earth would we impose or get involved in a trade war with Brazil? And the answer has nothing to do with trade. The answer has to do with the fact that Brazil, unlike the United States, is holding their former president and chief insurrectionist to account. Bolsonaro, this strongman that Trump so admires, led an insurrection against the election in which he lost, and he is being prosecuted in Brazil. Well, obviously, Trump doesn't like that because Trump apparently wants to make another American export be the export of insurrection against free and fair elections. So he puts on these tariffs against Brazil, but not content with trying to use trade in this way to bolster this wannabe dictator in Brazil, he is imposing sanctions on the judge in the case presiding over the Bolsonaro trial. This is just shocking. And with all the other terrible stuff going on, I didn't want you to fail to see this. Donald Trump placing sanctions on a judge trying another former president, wannabe dictator, insurrectionist, Bolsonaro, imposing trade tariffs. This is the policy of the United States of America. We have gone far from supporting democratic governance around the world to the point where we are using the levers of our power to help install anti-democratic dictators.
What has happened to the United States of America that it's using its power, its geopolitical heft, its economic might to install anti-democratic dictators? That's a massive shift from the America of the last 100 years. What a tragedy. What a shame. How could they? That man, by the way, Mr. Schiff, was formerly the chair of the House Representation Committee on Intelligence. I think that's what they call it, right? A bit like a select committee over here. Anyway, he's meant to be basically on top of US foreign policy and espionage and spycraft and all these things. Basically, doesn't seem to have much of an idea about how the world works when it comes to US machinations overseas. Helena, that said, it's easy for me to poo-poo what he's saying. It's still quite a significant intervention. What did you make of it?
Well, yeah, I think I would echo your sentiments. There are probably plenty of people in South America, very specifically, who are going to look at those comments and go, well, hang on a minute. What? Yeah, that's just America doing what it does best. So I think it's a very interesting intervention in that regard. What is interesting is the shift in rhetoric insofar as the attack on Trump's tariffs from the Democrats have principally come from the idea that it will increase inflation and it's essentially a tax on consumers. Because whilst there may be some cases where businesses will absorb the tariffs or the import prices will go down in terms of the exporters elsewhere to ensure they remain competitive within America, the broad consensus is that the vast majority of these tariffs are going to get paid by American citizens in the form of, well, they're import duties. They will increase the cost of goods and services, and there will be an inflationary effect. That has been the main criticism of the Democrats towards Trump's tariff policy. When actually, I think a lot of Americans kind of support the idea of tariffs in certain situations. They supported the first round of tariffs, and indeed they supported those same tariffs when they were bolstered by the Biden administration, when it was actually targeting completed products, completed commodities, such as Chinese cars, for example, or chips and things like that, which did genuinely help American manufacturing and American consumers and American workers. Whereas these kind of blanket tariffs being used for geopolitical reasons are only going to have an inflationary effect. But the Democrats kind of running on this line of saying, oh, look what's going to happen to the cost of living, this thing that you literally elected Donald Trump because he said he would fix. But unfortunately, most people who have supported the tariffs don't see them as being paid by themselves and won't listen to people who try and convince them that they will. So they've broadly got this idea into their heads that Trump is bringing manufacturing back, which isn't true. You have to target tariffs, not blanket tariffs, for this to work. It's a means of geopolitical maneuvering, and always has been, really, from day one. It's always been a way of trying to bully other countries into being able to do what the Trump administration wants. The problem is, of course, is that we saw from the election that appeals to democratic norms, appeals to diplomatic kind of or humanitarian international diplomatic role for the United States has no basis in United States democratic politics, especially not since that's been what America has supported for, as you say, the last century of geopolitics and international diplomacy. So that they really are kind of running out of ways to attack the Trump administration over this, and it seems like they're just trying to throw whatever it seems at the wall to try and see what sticks. When in reality, they just have to concentrate on the things that are really salient, such as the Epstein files, such as the problems in terms of the reality of the cost of living crisis. And so you're going to have to wait until the inflationary crisis does hit. You're going to have to wait until the additional deficits that they're spending on tax cuts to the rich hits inflation as interest rates stay high, and then show the reality of that is to the American people. And until all of those economic effects pass through the system, they're going to be shouting into the void, unfortunately.
Helena, look, I think this stuff can get overblown. It's going to crash the US economy. I don't think it's going to crash the US economy. I do think in some ways, and this is what I found really interesting, Trump is just trying to do what Biden was doing before, which is to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US. Biden was using things like the CHIPS Act, IRA, and it was very successful under Biden in terms of getting businesses out of places like Germany. Intel, for instance, they pulled back on a big investment they were going to make, I think, in Poland and another European country. That's now not going to happen because of the tariffs. Biden was using more of a carrot than a stick, but fundamentally they wanted to achieve the same thing. Do you think that lots of the liberal analysis on this stuff, it's all going to fail, it can't work, it's only going to hit the US consumer? Is there a part of you that thinks, you know what, we might not be entirely right?
I mean, I've always said from the start of this whole tariff business that it's perfectly reasonable to engage in protectionist trade policy. American workers have not benefited from the kind of NAFTA era of politics where they've been subject to a wage arbitrage with other countries throughout, not only in the global south, but in the global north as well, because of the strength of the American currency and because of the strength of the American economy. The issue, of course, is that when it came to the first round of Trump tariffs in his first term and the Biden round of tariffs, again, the vast majority of these tariffs went on completed products, right? Because America relies on imports of things like lumber from Canada very, very heavily. That's not a completed product that American workers are creating and competing with Canada for in the vast majority of cases. That's a natural resource that then goes into the construction of products that then you would want to sell, and then you would place tariffs on those completed products to ensure that you can't get outcompeted by cheaper labor overseas. But putting a tariff on Canada, on imports, on goods imports that involve one of like the critical components that you need for huge amounts of the kind of American economy. In fact, there are plenty of component parts for the auto industry in America. A really big part of the manufacturing base that's still there relies on the manufacture of individual component parts that get manufactured in Canada and in Mexico. So there's a real big problem that they have where this continual like free trade paradigm that's been created for a long time, which Milton Friedman probably made some pretty good arguments for in that era, where you can find certain specialisms that don't just go into the end product, but in the different component parts of an end product that's manufactured somewhere, and you can bring all of those specialisms together in one place to make a product in the best manner possible. Sure, I buy those arguments, right? But if you want to protect workers who complete the end product, you have to tariff the end product that's coming in. Again, tariffs on luxury cars from Germany, tariffs on electric cars from China, tariffs on microchips coming out of whatever country they might be being manufactured in. Obviously, China is a competitor for the United States, which was the reason for the CHIPS Act, is a reasonable way of doing it. But as you say, like that's different when you say that you do a tariff on the entirety of a geopolitical bloc in the case of the European Union, right? Or on an entire enemy country like China, when it's being done for geopolitical reasons. That doesn't make American work more, or it doesn't make American labor more valuable, because you're just increasing the price of the whole process of production by increasing the cost of all imports, of all component parts and all natural resources that aren't able to be manufactured or created or mined in the United States. So that's actually making American manufacturing less competitive when they could move to the country where all of those natural resources are, where labor is potentially cheaper, or indeed where they can import the component parts necessary for production without having to pay for a ludicrous tariff like 40% in some cases. So there is obviously an argument for protectionist trade policy. It's amusing that in the UK we always looked at the EU referendum as being a referendum on free trade, when in reality, the EU is a protectionist bloc. It protects Europe as a whole. So you can have internal wage arbitrage and internal kind of free market dynamics within the European Union, but it's fundamentally there to protect European manufacturers from wage arbitrage outside the EU. So we had people who supported protectionism in the UK supporting leaving the European Union, which was being pushed by free marketeers so that we could get free trade deals with India and with the United States and with the global south. So there's a real problem in terms of the way we talk about trade policy in this country and the way in which that trade policy is being talked about in the United States, as I said, which is being used as a geopolitical tool. When Biden was doing it, fully supported it, because on top of those tariffs, he was also doing a massive, huge industrial policy expansionary regime in terms of monetary policy. You know, they run 7% deficits in some cases. And because this was going into the supply side, this wasn't creating an inflationary effect. That was already happening before we saw the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, right? The IRA brought down the cost of commodities because it put more money into the supply side of the economy. And that's a level of industrial support that you need to make your protectionist policy work. Is the Trump campaign doing industrial policy? No. In fact, all the industrial policy that happened under Joe Biden, they're cancelling that. They cancelled things from the Inflation Reduction Act, which goes directly into a lot of Republican states. A lot of, like Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia was talking about the new jobs that were created in green energy in her district. And those subsidies are being removed by the Trump administration to pay for tax cuts to billionaires. They're going to get used for stock buybacks. So whilst the narrative is certainly been brought up by the American right, and the free trade era is certainly dying out, right? Not necessarily the end of globalization, but unilateral neoliberal free trade as being as far less popular than it was 30 years ago. The idea that it's going to help American consumers, the idea that it's going to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States when they're doing all of the things against what is necessary to ensure the survival of these industries, shows that I think that the Trump tariff plan, the Big Beautiful Bill, and his broader macroeconomic policy is going to be devastating for the United States working class. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.